Now that you've had your energizing coffee, let's continue with the hard but rewarding life of a startup. Building a global company that has the potential to dominate the global market is a complex and hard thing to do. Top experts who have built dominating products, raised millions of venture capital, and get millions of users will give you insider tips and tricks, how they have succeeded and where they failed. You'll learn from entrepreneurs, investors, and industry experts.
And we're going to have a great panel. Actually, we're going to need 3 seats today. I'll be hosting this one. It's about how to prepare your startup to scale. And I suppose this is one of your top priorities on your minds if you build a startup, no matter what stage you're in. If you're already supposed to be scaling, I hope you get some insights today, and that's definitely on your mind. But even if you're at the very beginning, maybe taking in your first angel funding, pre-seed funding, you're building a business that is aimed to scale. If you're not scaling, you're failing. It's really, you've entered the game, go big or go home, right? If you bring investors on, they need you to return those investments. They want you, they need you to go big. So you need to scale. So this topic definitely relevant. We'll have 2 founders here on stage with me that will be available for me to grill them a little bit for you. I'll be your roast master, so to say, but also to ask your questions that you can pass up to the stage by raising your hands. It's supposed to be interactive in that sense as well, to give you value. And I hope I can ask some smart, good questions, because I've started companies myself. 2 of them were startups. So from the beginning, it was clear we wanted to scale them. And they raised several millions of fundings, and there was a lot of pressure to scale. And I hope I can use that knowledge to ask the best questions for you. And in my spare time, I also do a couple of podcasts, an English one, startupmilestones.eu, and a German one, startuppodcast.at, which you are happy to check out some interesting founders there as well. So let me invite on stage my 2 panelists. And I'll introduce you while you sit down. Let's do it like this. Come on stage. And we'll continue then. Mariano Kostelec. Hey, Mariano. This gentleman also has been on the podcast and shared some knowledge. Actually, we recorded it here at PODIM, I think 2 years ago. And the topic was how to grow 500% year on year and beat Rocket Internet. So check out that episode, and we're going to talk about a few things there as well. And the second guest, I hope he's here, Stephan Schambach. Are you around here? Otherwise, we're going to start it in a fireside chat setting. And if anyone sees Stephan, he just send him up on stage. All right, cool. So let's get started, the 2 of us. Thanks so much for being here. And is this timer for us, the 26 minutes? Is this 26 we got? Okay, I want to make sure that you can ask your questions as well. But maybe, Mariano, let me introduce you real quick. I mean, you're the founder and CCO of the company Uniplaces, which is for accommodation for students, and you have raised over $27 million to date, I think. So this gives you an idea. There are some ideas and expectations for growth, or some need for the money. I mean, you want to put that money somewhere, and normally it goes towards growth. How would you define scaling? In 1 sentence or less?
Well, less than a sentence. No, scaling is definitely about like growing and growing fast, especially what VCs expect. So I would say fast growth.
What do you feel? I mean, you've definitely entered the growth stage. I think we all know. And for those younger founders out there, if you raise the millions and above, this is growth capital. Typically, something is already working in your business. You want to put money towards something that's already starting to work, and you want to scale and make it bigger. What do you feel are some of the big misconceptions about scaling that you see when you talk with younger founders?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say that maybe contradicting the introduction that it's actually not always all about scaling. Because I think one of the biggest challenges is when you actually scale without knowing how to scale. And that's the mistakes that we've done and a lot of people do. So it is clearly important when you're a business, especially if it's venture-backed, you need to grow, you need to scale, but you need to know how to do it. And that's where the tricky part becomes, because you can actually just grow, grow costs, grow your operation, and like launch new countries and so on. But if revenue doesn't grow, you have a problem, because it's really easy to actually open new offices, hire more people, and so on. But like the challenge is really doing that in a sustainable way. So I think that's probably where it's important to really see how to do it and go deeper before trying to rush into it.
And also maybe to get us started, give us an idea of, if you look at your company and go back in time a little bit when really you brought in the first bigger funding round, you had to think about how to distribute those fundings, that money. What are aspects and parts within a startup, within a business, that you need to scale?
So it happened to us a few times. Obviously, we raised a number of rounds of funding. We got competitors coming to the market and so on. And each of these things trigger, like, let's grow, let's go to new cities, new countries. Our business is a marketplace that operates in different cities. So adding new cities is really what was all about. But, one thing that what is needed is actually have also the processes, the systems in place to support a bigger scale operation. And I think that's some of the challenges we face where we open a new market, but then our, let's say, systems were not actually yet, in place, so things get very inefficient. And you had to constantly be catching up to make the whole machine work in an efficient way while we are growing into more markets and geographies.
Very cool. Maybe walk us through. All right, cool stuff. So maybe walk us through quickly your funding rounds, your history a little bit, that we get a feeling for where was where the hockey stick started to kick in, at least from the funding side, and then let's dive into how you translated that into actual growth and scaling of your business.
So when we started this business in the first place, we were actually bootstrapping for the beginning. We launched, let's say, a first platform, let's say a very basic MVP. We got first, let's say, an angel round, about 200,000 euro, which was our first outside money, let's say. We at the time were still trying to figure out the actual business model, so what was really the business all about. And I would say we pivoted, we changed it quite a lot in that time until we really got the model that we have today, which started to work. And it took us 1 year pretty much from when we started till we found out actually what should the business model be. We launched that platform, it started to get some numbers, and then we raised a first, let's say, VC round of about 1 million euro, which was, clearly, to start pushing things. And that was at the time, a huge jump, I would say. I don't think we're still at a stage to scale there. We did open, one more city, so we actually started to expand. But then a year later, we raised another 3 million euro round. And at that stage, we actually already said, let's actually start scaling. And actually it was too early, to be honest. So we also had competition coming in. So it was very, maybe, I would say, like, naive, or like how we're thinking, but like we looked at, people told us you should be the first in a market, the first mover advantage is always important. So with that kind of concept, we actually tried to, we call it like plant a flag in lots of countries. But yeah, we saw that was just more for marketing purposes than actually building the operation there. And also the amount of funding was not enough to actually scale a lot there. We still, most of our revenues still came from 1 or 2 cities only, even though we had maybe 10 or more areas that we say we were present, so it was more from that perspective. But like, those 2 cities or 3 cities that we actually were focusing on were actually growing very well. So then we managed to raise another round of funding, which was over 22 million. And at that stage, we definitely, started to really develop more markets, So it went through a lot of stages, but I think even on the bigger round of funding, even at that time, we went probably too fast, because we tried to, we said, let's actually use this round of funding to establish the business in most European countries. And we tried to do that, but still, we went from whatever number of cities we had, we scaled to about 40 or 50. But then actually realized, like 6 months or almost 12 months later, that still most of the revenues, most of the traction came from about 10 cities. So 10 markets. So we then still focus again on those 10, and I think we've seen this constantly where like we think it's easy to grow, but then actually it's not that easy. And like you constantly go back to focus on a few core markets that really work while fine-tuning that engine, how to actually more systematically grow to a new city or a new market, but in a way that actually is sustainable. And I think that is the challenge that we're constantly facing, and we're fine-tuning that model. So we definitely have now a lot better, clarity and a plan how to operate in the market. But like we're, trying and testing different things. Some things work, some didn't. But like I think that was really key to keep fine-tuning that. and not go too far, too fast, in terms of trying to scale before it was kind of ready for that.
So I suppose most of you in the audience, if you are working on your startup, you're in the earlier stages, right? So I want to maybe zoom in, not on the 20 million funding round, also not on the 3 million, but the 1 million. Because in my last startup, I also had the 1.2 million was the first funding round. Actually, the first one we had, we were cash flow positive before. We skipped the pre-seed seed rounds, and things really change when you get those 7 digits into your bank account, right? I mean, first of all, nice party. I printed out the pay slip and framed it, right? With the 7 digits that was over my office. But then you have to get to work, right? Party's over. What concretely? Let's dive into that. What did you really change about the organization? What did you do with that million?
So I think that was definitely a big jump from before, and like the company start becoming a lot more professional. You have professional investors on board, who have clear a lot of expectations. You start having a board, and you need to report to that. But in terms of the operation, I don't think the team changed that much. We definitely hired more people, and basically was getting the business to the next stage. But we actually, I don't think the actual business changed dramatically. I think it was more, became more professional. We obviously had more resources. So, we start to invest more in technology. So building an engineering team, we start to build more of our sales team and so on. I think the changes probably came around that the team size grew. And, from a small team of like 5-6 people to, I think we're like 20, 30 posts around, that was a completely different dynamic, because like from 5 to 30, you have like, 4, 5, 6 times more people, in a few months' time. And a lot of things have to change, especially around communication internally, like how you structure teams. When it's a small team and everyone sits around the table, it's very easy to plan, to make sure everyone's on the same page. When you have then like an engineering department, like a sales team, and a marketing team, and so on, that communication becomes a lot harder. So start to really think, strategically how to manage that was important at the time. So I think that was really probably one of the bigger challenges. And for us, we were first-time founders, so it was the first business we built, and we had to learn that as well as we kind of were growing it. And like, we didn't know everything in the beginning. I think, in the beginning, communication was super informal. But then, we started to realize things were breaking down. People didn't know what was going on and so on. So we're kind of forced to constantly rethink what's happening, what we're doing, and how we're doing it.
So what kind of things did you implement? Because one of my big learnings was I was early on in Silicon Valley, and I met really great founders, advisors there who told me a lot also around communication, team building. How do you make sure that before everybody who could just share a lunch together and be up to date, now you have this bigger team, right? What were a couple of the concrete things around communication and team that you had to implement to carry that scaling, that growth at that point?
I think one thing we implemented at the time that we kept doing consistently since then was do like a weekly all hands meeting. So we picked one day a week and we gathered the whole team. We always had like a bit of an update, what was happening in the company. And in every one of the session, one person from the team, from a different team, presented something, so one of their projects or like what they're doing, like if it was the product team, they presented like new platforms. If it was maybe the operations team, they show like what's the latest in different markets, or really actually show what they're doing. And that started to really make sure that people know what's happening, and like keep that same bonding, I would say, that they had in the beginning, but in that kind of weekly session. And I think that's something we still do today, and it's probably one of the best things that we started around that time, and it clearly improved massively, communication, the whole team building, the whole spirit, and making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page and aligned with what are the plans and what's happening across the different areas of the business.
All right, very good. And at this point, I want to also welcome on stage Stephan Schambach. Come on, jump on up and join us at the session. Give him a big round of applause. Welcome. Take your seat. Here is grab this mic. There you go. And thanks also for joining us here on stage. I think we now have a really good perspective from a repeat entrepreneur who built companies to scale at a tremendous pace as well. Let me just share a few insights about Stephan. I mean, back in the 90s, he pioneered in the e-commerce space, co-founding Intershop, which was a standard software for online shopping, which back at the time was really revolutionary and cutting edge. He also founded Demandware, first cloud-based e-commerce service, which he eventually sold to Salesforce for a slim 2.8 billion, right, dollars. So I suppose there was some scaling going on before that as well. And he's back at it now with his current company or CEO called NewStore. So he's in it again, and I'm supposing also working on scaling it and not keeping it a mom and pop shop. So Stephan, maybe to join us here, how would you describe what scaling means in one sentence or less?
Finding a repeatable sales model, in a way. I mean, it is not difficult to get to a point where you have a product market fit for something, but to get this to something that can be replicated, the entire organization must follow every process changes. And actually at NewStore, we're currently at this point.
So explain a bit more. What is this point that you're at? You've done this before, so you probably have a very observant eye on what's going on in your organization. What would you say are those, what do you pay most attention to now that you make sure it's going to be scalable and growable into the future?
Okay, so the fact that I've done it before doesn't mean I can get it, I will get it right. So to some degree, I also got it wrong with the timing. So I was hoping to scale much sooner, but you know, it takes some time until a true product market fit is achieved. And that means you can sell the product the way it is without making additional promises on a per customer basis. And maybe the customers are happy with what you have on the roadmap for later. But at that point, you may still only have, or in NewStore's case, a handful of customers and maybe 10 more that signed up. The processes required to prepare for worldwide rollout, growth of a sales force, what's required to do support and maintenance and implementation in a much more efficient, streamlined way. Those are some of the things that we're currently working on.
And Mariano, you talked about this first million coming in and what you built around the team. Now, if you look back at that stage, and also if you go in your current company at this point, or maybe in your previous company at the point where you started to bring in money to actually grow the things that started to work, if you look back at that, what were some mistakes you made, some things that you would do differently if you could jump into the time machine?
So I think we did mistakes constantly, not just during that time. Since we're talking about scaling, I think for us at the time, we started our business in Portugal. So Lisbon was our first city. And then, one of our co-founders is based in London. So it made sense to actually use London as a second city. But we also tried to open Madrid, the third city at the same time. And it was that, so we spread ourselves too thinly. Like we pretty much almost replicate our business in 3 locations, which didn't really make much sense, and I think that was definitely a mistake, we didn't know how to do it, so obviously we're just trying, but I think, trying to be more, doing it slowly, doing more step by step, going first to one city and find that repeatable model, like you were mentioning, that I think that is key. So I think we didn't know exactly what a repeatable model was. So we just kind of said, okay, let's just replicate everything again. And it was definitely not the best way, especially when you look at, you consume resources, you can raise more funding, but then if you just spend it and the revenue doesn't start growing is not good, So I think finding that system, that structure, to actually replicate that in a more efficient way is something we should have spent probably more time developing, before trying to just replicate stuff in that way.
Stephan, what would you do once you pop out of the time machine and meet yourself?
Okay, so at NewStore, in particular, I invested into sales and marketing and other functions way too early and too aggressively, thinking that the product plans may be on time, but that wasn't the case necessarily. So it took a little bit longer to get the product right. It took longer to understand which modules we needed to add and which ones, were more of a hindrance, really. And obviously we invested ahead, and some of that wasn't efficient investment. So I'd say until you really know that customers are buying, just be very careful about planning ahead on the hiring side, in particular when it comes to go-to-market functions.
Some tips around hiring. I think that's such an important topic. You mentioned that you might have done it prematurely and so on. Some general tips about hiring in that growth phase?
I don't know. I mean, initially, you try to hire, even in sales, you try to hire people who can help shape the product, who are really good at bringing customer feedback back and are careful about selling to customers that may not be good for the product, because you're still like in a mode where you just try to build a product that other companies might want to buy. Whereas later, you have something, if you have something that can be replicated, you can hire people who are good at taking a template and very disciplined at, applying it. So I guess you need different types of skills at different parts of the journey.
For sure. I think also one of my experiences is if you have a sales organization, if you bring in those sales animals who have a network in the space, who know the people, where you bring them in and pay them really good money because they can start working day one and they don't have to build up the network, they expect something that they can sell. Right? They want to make good commissions. They want to close deals. They don't care so much about reading books like the Mom Test, where it's actually maybe going to the customers to learn more about them. No, they want to tell them and close the deals, right? Early on, you mentioned you want to get more feedback in. So is one of the learnings or mistakes founders can maybe make to offload sales to an employee too early? Up to what point should a founder or one of the founder team members maybe be the person doing the sales meetings? Any thoughts on that?
So I think that depends clearly on the business, and what kind of customers you have. Because if your customers are, let's say, large corporates and so on, the founder or one of the key people should probably be always like the main face of that. If your customers, require like huge sales team and they're not that important, you don't need to do all of that. But I would say it's always important to be speaking to customers, So you may be doing the sale, some part of the sales, or just, engaging with customers. I think that is key to constantly do it, because that's where you really, get the feedback if, your customers, what they think of your business, what works, what doesn't, what they like, And I think people talk about product market fit as if it's like you get to that point and that's it, and then it works from then on. But actually, that process of constantly engaging with customers, getting their feedback and potentially improving stuff, it's an ongoing process. So I would say it's important to always be speaking to them. But as you scale the business, you obviously have to start delegating, So once your business reaches a scale, you need to actually have, if your business requires sales and, you have a sales team, you delegate to someone to own that function. You clearly need to do that at some point, but you shouldn't kind of completely lose sight of it.
At what point did you do it?
At what point did you? So for us, like, let's say I still speak to customers like often. So we actually do a lot of even events, to be honest, like this kind of stuff. We do this kind of stuff with our customers. And I think that's one of the best things we've actually done, was starting to do like once a year in different markets, like literally events for the industry, and you invite actually all our customers, partners, and companies, and those are some of the best sessions because people really, engage, and like tell us a lot of stuff, and actually we are connecting the whole industry. So those are like some of the key things. But then throughout, constantly we do speak, and even go for lunch with a big account, I do that like on a regular basis, and like I think, I keep doing it because I think it's definitely a key part of, being connected to what's happening across the organization.
Just for context, who are those big customers? Because if it's accommodation for students, you might think that the customer is the student, but you have key accounts. Who would those be?
Yeah, so our business is a marketplace. So we have students on one side who book accommodation, and then landlords or property managers on the other. So when I'm talking about these customers, most in the landlord side, who are like property managers, so are actually companies that own or manage like hundreds of apartments, for example, or kind of real estate businesses. So that's one side, but even on the student side, we stay connected with them, because we do events at universities and so on. So I still go to some of these events directly, and you engage with your customers. In our case, on both sides, because we are actually marketplace, so we have two sets of customers, I would say, and I think it's important to be connected with both.
And Stephan, can I zoom in with you on Demandware, the company that you exited for billions? It raises a little bit of my interest, of course. It's not so often that I talk to an exit billionaire, so to say. Take us back at that point where you started to scale your sales team. At what time did you decide to do that? And up until what point did one of your founder team basically do most of the sales and getting that feedback in still?
I think this was about 5 years into the life of the company. We did have a sales function before, of course, but we only had like a handful of smaller customers, and in some quarters we didn't sign up a customer at all. And then we finally sold and launched a customer that was representative of the type of customers we wanted to sell to. We wrapped the entire company around it. It was very successful, and from then on, we knew we could begin, to scale it a little bit more systematically. That was also a function of bringing someone into the business who knew how to scale it, because I don't know how to scale a sales force. I need people to do this for me. And we had a couple of false starts hiring the right sales executives. I mean, that also happens. I think we went through 3 or 4. And then finally, I hired a gentleman, Jeff Barnett, who was really good at analyzing the situation and starting small, but basically building a sales function that would scale, that would bring in trainees, invest in training, certification, other things. And if I look back, what was really excellent about Demandware, I think we were really good at building the product and selling it. We were not so good at marketing, for example, or some other disciplines. I say we sucked. We just didn't do it very well. But we had these 2 things that worked really, really well, that were run by people who were really good at it. And again, it doesn't mean it's always going to be like this for all companies, but at Demandware, those 2 functions were the secrets of success.
So let's talk about products. Are there some things, because this topic of the panel is how to prepare to scale, right? Are there some things that you learned or that you had in place already that you did in your development on the product side ahead of time so it would be able to scale? Because I know there are 2 schools of thought, basically. One is, okay, if we build it, let's build it so that it can scale right away. So we don't have to redo it because that's a nightmare. And there are a lot of people also saying, hey, just build it that you can get to the next milestone, and that's fine. Don't worry about having thousands of clients on the platform. Get the first one. And then if you have to redo it. What are some thoughts on that from your perspective?
I think you need to have a little bit of both. You need to have a perspective on how would the architecture evolve once it scales. If you don't have that, you don't have a business. I mean, at NewStore, for example, most of our wannabe competitors, they start with the skateboard approach, and all they have is individual projects for individual customers. It never becomes a platform. We set out saying, yes, we want to build a platform. And yes, some pieces will need to be refactored, but by and large, we're building a platform. So there's certain choices you make with the technology stack, the type of people you hire, and so forth. But obviously, it sometimes happens that you over-engineer. It just happens. And one of the challenges is that it is difficult to find your first set of customers. And that first set of customers may not be the customers you ultimately want to sell to. But let's say you want to sell to somewhat larger companies, and they are risk averse. They want to see that this product actually works. So you have to find those who are willing to take a risk, and they are usually much smaller. So you have this phase where you're trying to find some smaller customers, but they're growing, or they're being watched by industry observers because they do something new. So they may just be enough of a reference for the next step up the ladder. And all the way you kind of know, once you're at your eventual size of customer or your segment that you want to sell to, you may not want to go after the small ones anymore. And obviously there are differences in the product, in the features, they built for the smaller ones versus what you built for the larger ones. And so to manage that conflict or this period is very challenging and at times very frustrating.
And is there a short answer to the question? Do you need to kick out the small ones, the ones that were just a stepping stone? Do you need to get rid of them to not distract your organization at some point?
It very much depends. At Demandware, the first customer we ever signed was a company called Sabars. Sabars is a deli in New York, a big deli. They have, it's like a multi-story building, and they're still on the platform, even though the company, they launched in 2004, basically a couple of months after we started the company, and they're still on what's now called Salesforce Commerce, the old Demandware product. We had a couple of others that we had to cut off. We basically had to tell them, for example, there was a jeweler that was basically family run, but it turned out only to be like three employees, and they just couldn't handle the tools that we gave them to run their website because they didn't have time. Sometimes they wouldn't look at the tools for 3 days in a row at the admin interface, for example, and we had to tell them, hey, listen, we cannot do this for you. And even though they protested, we had to tell them, we have to cut you loose. But so some of these early customers may develop into lifetime customers, and some don't. But if you know as an entrepreneur that they're holding you back, you have to find a way to cut them loose.
Mariano, any thoughts on the product side? I know there are a lot of tech-sided founders around here in the community.
Yeah, there's two things maybe I want to share on that side. One is a little bit about customer segments. In our case, on the landlord side, we had from one perspective, let's say landlords had like 1 or 2 apartments. On the other one, we had these property management businesses that had hundreds of apartments, And, in some cities that were more of the first one, in some more the other ones, and so on. And in terms of our product development, we always had to take the decision who we're going to prioritize, because the type of tools, the type of systems that each of them needed is completely different. A guy that is trying to manage availabilities of like 300 properties is very different from, let's say, a grandmother that has like 1 spare room in her house. And like that was the kind of 2 different segments. So we had always a challenge, and it was never actually easy, because if you're trying to make those customers happy, those other ones would start complaining, or the other way. And like we had to constantly be trying to realize what is maybe the most common set of functionalities or tools or whatever that helps both, but it was never like perfect, And I think we are constantly juggling a little bit with those. We even had discussions as to, should we just stop working with one of these 2 segments at some point? We never cut them off completely, but like, we had, I think that was clearly a challenge, but like, we clearly had the decision often like, where are we going to prioritize? And like, during that time, the other side was suffering a little bit. And we had to be telling those customers that we have a roadmap, we're going to build more stuff for them. It's just going to take another 6 months or more to keep them engaged. But that was a challenge. And I think that was one of the constant decisions that we're trying to do. Another point I want to share in terms of product development and, what happened, which was super interesting, as we grew the organization, as we started to scale, we grew the team, So in the beginning, I was mentioning it was a small team. People were all speaking to each other, engineers, marketing, sales, everyone was together. As we started to grow, we grew to over 100 people. And we had a bigger office that had actually 2 floors. So we put our engineering team on the top floor and our customer service, marketing, operations on the other floor. And people actually stopped speaking that much, And what had happened is that what these guys were doing was completely different from what the guys in the engineering team were actually building, And that was then never aligned, It was always causing problems. So we then actually one day said, okay, let's actually sit them together again. And like we asked the product team to actually, have a person of the product team focusing on marketing, one on sales, one on whatever, customer service, or one on different countries. And, get kind of feedback loop between our teams, a lot better. And that's when, the product team suddenly realized like how, let's say, inefficient our customer service team was in some things, or what are the questions that our customers constantly asking, and like they started to build stuff that it was a lot more relevant, and that was a small change that, it's when we did it, we didn't realize that would happen in terms of splitting to the 2 floors, but actually that communication between those teams was super key to make sure that engineering actually was clear aligned with what our team were doing and we're building stuff for them. Even on the customer, I think in our business, we have a big, let's say, customer service team. So we have a lot of people, asking stuff and so on. And actually, when you have product managers, working side to side with, let's say, our customer service team, that's where we're getting the best feedback as to what we should even prioritize in our product roadmap, because it was just clear, like, what actually customers were asking. And, I think that sitting them together, actually getting those teams to actually pair and like work side by side was really key and made us a lot more efficient and better in terms of product, management, building a roadmap, prioritizing, and so on.
I soon want to open it up for a couple of questions, so get them ready, and then you'll be able to shout them out. I'll repeat them on the microphone and ask our gentleman here on stage. One thing I wanted to address for sure, and you mentioned a little bit of maybe some mistakes you made or where you had to fine-tune your path after you got the money and wanted to scale. There are blog posts out there that claim even that premature scaling is the #1 reason for death of startups. So is it the #1 reason? I don't know, but premature scaling basically meaning you think you figured out how your business works and now let's do more of it and make it big and hire more people and do more of the same, right? To earn more money, get more clients and so on. Question to each of you, true or false? Is it a big threat, let's say? And what would be these kind of mistakes where you could jump the gun and do stuff too early while you shouldn't, even though you have the money in the bank?
It's clearly a mistake, but look, it happens to the best of us. It happened to me again after being an entrepreneur for almost 30 years. And what you do is you cut back. It's not nice, it's not fun, but occasionally, you have to reduce the resources.
Where did you overspend? What were areas where you thought, oh man, double down on that, some money at it? But then you had to
for example, at NewStore, the first customer was a rather large company, and we were hoping to basically partner with them, build the product, and then immediately start selling it to other large companies. But it didn't work out that way. In particular, because for them it was an internal experiment. And what some of the things they needed didn't really apply to the others, so we couldn't get product market fit with this method. But we had already invested in we have this great brand, everybody knows the brand, so it's easy to get into the door of others and try to sell it. It just didn't work out that way, and we had to basically scale back, build it the old-fashioned way, go to small customers first, and then climb the ladder. And I think one of the tricks to not die from this is to take the money when you can get it, not when you need it.
From the investors, you mean?
One of the challenges is that the investors, they want to give you the money when you need it, because then they have some control over what you do as an entrepreneur, and they can also get the terms they want. Yeah? But that's a mistake. As an entrepreneur, you really want to take the money when the excitement is as high as possible, and the investors want to invest, not knowing exactly what you spend it for, and have enough in the bank so that if you make a mistake, you can recover from it.
Mariano, you mentioned you went to maybe too many cities at the same time early on. Some other things.
I think asking the question exactly, is it #1 reason for failure or not? I don't know, but there's many reasons. I think that's definitely one of them we'll talk about now. I think the other major reason is usually internal misalignment, because that's where people go in different directions, even with investors or with the management team or the co-founders. Those are actually some more internal challenges that you don't always see, but actually can really damage a company, when people don't actually agree on where to focus and so on. But in terms of actually if it's scaling or not, I think the question is around your runway, how much cash you have, So it's easy, when you raise a lot of funding to actually spend a lot more. That's really easy. Fundraising always takes longer than you want it to take, and even if you've done it a few times, it still always takes long. Investors want to see the right growth, the right metrics, the process just takes time. In our case, we had one occasion where I think we had literally 1 week of cash left, in a bank, so it was tricky, you really go to the limit quite often sometimes in a business, and a week more means that maybe you might die when you close the business because you cannot actually even pay your employees anymore, And, you need to keep that in mind. And I think, we did scale back on certain occasions and so on. I think, what a lot of people forget, and actually is important to start thinking as early as possible, is, actually what you should be building probably is ideally a profitable organization, that doesn't require or rely just on investors, putting money to survive. I think the best thing is to look at investors' money as a tool to potentially scale, to grow, but when you know how to do it, as opposed to just needing money to survive, because otherwise you'll die. Clearly we had 1 week of cash and that was not good at all, it was definitely a bad situation. And it's, it would be great if you could just plan it perfectly and follow perfect plan and go smooth. But the reality is that never happens. So you have to adjust and you have to, quickly iterate. And I think being critical about that is key. And if you see something, you spend too much, you went too far ahead, something's not working, adjust it quickly. And that's usually the tough decisions that you have to do because they're the hard ones, especially when you promise people something, you have to take it back. You might have to let people go, you have to tell investors that you're changing your plan, or, these are not easy things, and I think it's important as a founder or when you're managing the company, to own those decisions, and it's your responsibility to take them, and I think the more critical you're there, the better you can, recover from mistakes and then learn and improve and actually go ahead better.
Time is flying. We have 10 more minutes or so. I wanted to open it up to you folks out there. Any questions from the audience at this point? Or let me rephrase. Who has the first question for the panel? Don't be shy. It's your chance now. Otherwise, afterwards, you have to chase those gentlemen. And maybe they're hungry. They're going for the food. It's difficult to get their attention. Anyone at this point? No? Okay. So let's get real tactical then. So slip into the shoes of a founder who is at that stage where maybe in the next 3, 6, 12 months, they might get that funding. They are preparing now for that scaling phase. Go back in your minds to that situation, your companies, or think about what their issues might be. What are things that they should think about that they may have not thought about yet, or some things they could or should prepare now, not needing them today, but once the money hits the bank, so that it doesn't cause issues?
Yeah, I think if you go back to when our team was 5, 6 people, and then we grew to about 30, so we really multiplied a lot of the headcount from that small base. The best thing we've done at the time was hire an HR person, actually, because we grew to 20 or more people without that, so we were just hiring people, really managing that, me and my co-founders. And suddenly you realize that you have no idea about how to do employment contracts or regulation about that. And, plenty of mistakes happen, and that just starts creating chaos, You need someone to really be there, like the HR kind of manager. It was actually one of these things you usually maybe don't think about, but I think for us, when you go to 20 people or 30, that was really when we brought that person for the first time on board, and it really, it was a really key, I think at the time, that was our key hire, main hire we're actually doing, because without that, we wouldn't support even that structure, even less larger operation.
So would you say one of the calls to action or tips for founders would be think about what roles you might need once your organization scales? HR might be one of them. And knowing that recruiting takes some time, especially if you want to recruit such an important role, you want to be very selective, that you need to start that recruiting process in time so that you can ideally hire the person the day after you have the money, right? That you can build out your network, find those people, do interviews, this kind of thing. So build up your recruiting pipeline a bit.
Yeah, I think definitely it's key to plan ahead, in terms of where you want to head, in terms of the business and what roles you need, across all the functions. And it definitely takes time to hire. And it's important to really spend time in hiring, especially in the beginning, because to be honest, the hires you do in the beginning are the foundation of your business. And they're the ones that are going to be hiring more people later on. And people talk, A people hire A and so on. So you need to spend time with your first hire, and it's not an easy process. You need to go through it and plan ahead. You can also hire before you raise the funding and actually time it somehow. I think in our case, I remember at the time, because we definitely started that kind of scaling process. I have two co-founders, so one of my co-founders was the guy in London doing the fundraising, and myself and that one were actually hiring people at the same time. And that time he was worried that if we don't get the cash in the bank soon enough, we actually should stop that hiring. So I think, you have to plan and you have to have the pipeline, and definitely takes time. But you should do it early, and I think you shouldn't just wait. If your business requires to get more people for different functions and so on, you shouldn't just be waiting to start the process after you get the funding, because once you have that funding, you should actually start deploying and using it, well and quickly. You shouldn't actually then start thinking what's the next stage. That should be all part of an ongoing kind of projection and plan that you should have.
Stephan, what should founders do ahead of time?
On the one hand, this applies to all phases of a company. Plans are useless pretty quickly, right? They're useless after 3 months or 6 months. But planning is a very important skill that you want to engage in with your management team constantly. And so to build a relationship with investors where a plan is set when the investment is made, and then it's always referenced back to that Series A investment. After 3 years, that just causes bad relationships. It doesn't work like that. So I think that's important. Then on the hiring side, it's important to keep in mind that ideally you want to hire smoothly and not have periods where you bring on a lot of people at once and then others where you don't onboard anybody, because hiring and onboarding is taking time away from your best people. And if you hire a lot of people, it may mean that's the only thing they're doing, and you're not getting anything else done. And if you don't do it, you have a bunch of people sitting around to get a paycheck, but they don't know what to do because they're not being onboarded properly. So that's a big challenge, because often venture capital finance companies, they try to hire a lot of people once they got the money. And when the money gets tight, they stop the practice, and this up and down in the hiring velocity is just not helpful in building culture and getting the maximum efficiency out of the people you already have.
Good points. Any more tactics to wrap up this session? Any more tips? We talked about hiring a bit. We talked about organizational structures. Any final thoughts?
I think going to those topics around fundraising, growing and so on, I think one of the costs that in a lot of, let's say, B2C kind of companies becomes really big too quickly is marketing. And I think that's where it's also important to really, not try to just spend too much too early, but rather test and really understand, the unit economics of every dollar, every euro spent, because that's clearly where you can really quickly burn a lot of money. Take Google, Facebook, you just can burn millions without even realizing it, how quickly that goes. And if that doesn't translate to the same speed to revenue, to conversions, you have a big problem. And I think that is probably one of, at least in our case, our two biggest costs are headcount and marketing. So those are really the two key drivers, that if you overspend any of them, you have a big problem, and I think both you need to really, really manage, especially with these kind of businesses where try to build consumer brands or, things that you really rely on that kind of marketing. I think this is another one where you should really, go slower than you probably want to go, because it's too easy to go too fast. And then you have to always go back, and in that process, you probably burn too much money, and you cannot recover that easily.
Very good. I think that wraps up the session. Thank you so much, Mariano and Stephan, for sharing these insights. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. And hope you took away quite a few of actionable tips, advice, some insights. So keep on networking, and as always, keep up that startup spirit. Thank you.